Story number 1. Deep Woods Intruder. This happened in 2015 when I was still living back at home with my parents. We lived outside of Wasilla, Alaska, next to a set of woods. It's here I would often go for walks or go camping with my cousins. By the way, I'm female and I was 15 when it happened. So it was a Saturday evening in April and I was home alone working on some homework. At around 7 p.m., my dog started to bark. She's a German Shepherd, by the way, and for the most part, she's pretty quiet. Honestly, it's very rare to hear her barking or making a sound at anything, let alone anyone. Still, I figured perhaps I could take this as a break to go on a walk with her. I grabbed a leash and a sweater, and we walk out into the nearby woods. About a half-mile in, I began to hear someone talking further up ahead of me. Curious, I make my way toward the sound until I saw a man that sat talking on his cell phone, but I found this odd. The nearest neighbors were at least half a mile away from me. Not only that, but this guy didn't look like the neighbors. This guy looked homeless with dirty clothing. I would put him in his early 40s, 6'4", 250-ish pounds with a beanie and a long scruffy beard. On top of this, he had this really creepy smile on his face. It's almost as if he had the expression of,
"Oh yeah, I finally got one."
This put me on the edge since I'd never seen him before. I gave him a nervous smile and wave, and then started to head back home. This wasn't before he called out to me.
"Hey girl, come over here. I want to talk to you about something."
I ignored him and continued to walk, but it didn't seem like he was having any of this.
"Hey, I said I needed to talk to you, so come back here and listen."
Sorry, sir, I wasn't really paying attention. Did you need something?
"Yeah, what I need is someone like you. Don't you want to spend some time out here with me?"
Excuse me? Is that some sort of joke? I'll be on my way now.
"Oh, come on, you can't hide from me. After all, I already know where you live. That's a nice little house you have up ahead."
I froze, because he then proceeded to describe my house detail by detail. Perhaps he'd been watching my house and he knew I lived there. I'm not sure, but in those moments, I started to think about the times I would hear footsteps outside at night. In fact, there would be mornings we would wake up and we would find tracks in the dirt. I always wrote this off as my dad getting up to go to work early. However, I didn't notice them the night before, which by the way my parents had already left 2 nights prior. I still wrote these off as my dad's prints since it hadn't rained or anything to wash them away. Anyways, this was when my dog started to growl at him, and he finally starts to back off. However, this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. Fast forward to later that evening. By now, I had already called officers, and I told them about the suspicious man near my house. Unfortunately, they couldn't find anyone, so we wrote it off as a random creeper just out in the woods. At around 11 p.m., I sat on the couch eating some popcorn and watching some late-night television. That's when I noticed my front porch light suddenly turn on from the corner of my eye. To my side, I have a window that looks out into the front yard. Of course, there's a curtain, so I can't see if anybody is outside, but I can see the light. I found this odd as it only turns on if it detects movement. It did get my attention, but it turned off after about 30 seconds. I tell myself it was most likely just a small animal and I continue to watch TV. Fast forward an hour later, I'm pretty tired and I'm making my way upstairs into my room. This was when I happened to have one final look outside. I have a perfect view of the woods from my upstairs window, and that's when I could see it. There is a figure stumbling out from the woods and heading toward my house. I panicked because I immediately thought about the man from earlier. However, it turned out that this guy wasn't alone. As I saw him walking up to my house, I could hear my dog barking downstairs. Through her barking, I could hear loud knocks on the front door and someone yelling to open the door.
"Open up. It's the police. We need to talk to you."
I wasn't buying any of this. In fact, that's when I called officers to confirm. Hello? I'm the girl who called a bit earlier. There are these 2 strange men. They're outside my house and they're telling me to open the door. They're telling me they're officers, but I don't see any cruiser or vehicle saying they are. Also, they're not wearing the proper uniforms. They kind of look like home intruders to me. Okay, sweetie. We're sending officers there right now to check things out. Make sure to stay in your room and put as much as you can between yourself and them. As far as I know, no officer was called out there. I step out of my room and, in a hushed yell, I tell my dog to come back upstairs, but she wasn't having any of it. She just kept barking, and these guys didn't seem to care. That's when I remembered my dad's vintage Winchester he kept in his room. I've used it before, and I figured if it came down to it, I would have to use it. I go and grab it, and this was finally when my dog came and joined me. We then locked ourselves in my room, and that's when I heard it. There was a loud crash downstairs, which echoed through my dark and quiet house. They were now inside the home, and they began throwing things around, presumably taking what they could. Honestly, if they were just after our belongings, that would have been fine, but it's what I heard next that I will never forget. As I heard footsteps making their way upstairs, I could hear a familiar voice call out,
"Where's my precious little cupcake from earlier? I know you're hiding in this house somewhere."
I guess it didn't help that my dog was barking up a storm, but hey, little did they know the surprise I had waiting for them. Moments later, they start kicking at my door, and that's when I took action. Bam! A warning shot at the door sends these two running out of the house, faster than you can say cherry pie. Poor door was left with a hole in it, but my quick thinking saved me from what could have been something worse. Well, I watched as both of them run off into the woods as officers arrived moments later. I now open my window and I yell out to them and say, "Hey, they went over there, into the woods. You can't miss them." They chase after them, and minutes later, they are eventually caught. As it turned out, they had been checking my house out for the past couple of weeks, waiting for an opportunity to break in. It just so happened they used the nearby woods as their meetup spot. As for that afternoon I stumbled upon him talking on the phone, it was him finalizing the details with his partner. Safe to say, I won't be seeing them around anytime soon. Story number 2. Alaskan Wilderness Encounter. This took place about a year ago, and it happened to my sister and I. As some background on myself, I'm male, 19 years old, and my sister is 15. We live in Seward, Alaska, which is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, about a 30-minute drive from our home is a nature trail that we often go and check out during the summer months. Most of the time it's to go out camping with family or just go exploring for the day. On the afternoon this happened, it was both my sister and I, and we were going out to get some firewood in the woods. See, we were coming back from visiting some friends who lived about an hour away. We figured that on our way back home, we could get some supplies. Now, being born in Alaska, we're used to the cold and the dark, so we didn't mind being out there alone with just our flashlights and axe. Anywho, we arrived around 3 p.m. and we began walking about half a mile in. Once we found a good spot, we started to collect some firewood. Fast forward 20 minutes of work later and we take a break to warm up some coffee with our portable coffee maker. As we sat there talking, we both began to hear the undeniable sounds of footsteps. They seemed pretty far, but at the same time, they echoed through the trees around us. Weird considering we didn't see any of the cars parked near us. Anyways, my sister and I then looked around, but eventually the footsteps silenced. Could it have been that maybe we heard a bear or other animal? Well, that wouldn't be possible. It's the middle of December and they're already asleep for the winter season. But then, what was the explanation? Well, we ended up ignoring it and we continue on with our work. Eventually, we get enough firewood and started to make our way back to the car. As we could see our car through the opening ahead of us, we ended up seeing movement. So, with our flashlights, we can then see someone walking around our car, seemingly just inspecting it. This made my sister and I sorta suspicious. See, we ended up parking and going into an area that was a bit further up ahead. That said private property. Could it have been the owner coming to warn us that we were on his land? Well, either way, the light from our flashlights got his attention as he now yelled back towards us. Suddenly, he comes chasing after my sister and I, and we drop the firewood we had. We then book it, heading off into the dark woods behind us. Well, just imagine the scene, the middle of nowhere, the deep woods at night, with no one else around for miles. That was the nightmare we were going through right now, as we could hear this man getting closer and closer to us. All the while, my sister and I are hoping that neither of us trip and fall over anything. After all, it's not exactly easy to run in the snow. I mean, have you tried it? Well, after about 5 minutes of running around, we don't see or hear him anymore. But the next realization is what hits us. We are now off the trail we took, and we're completely lost. On top of that, our phones have no reception out here, so how were we going to call for help? So, what were our next options? Easy, find our way back to the car without being spotted by this lunatic. So, we waited and hid underneath some shrubbery for what seemed like an eternity, and that's when we could start to hear it. I kid you not. We started to hear that man calling out to us.
Where are you two hiding at? Wait until I find the both of you.
Bam! That's when we could hear a loud pop echo around us. Great. This just went from bad to really bad. This guy was armed. I remember my sister looking over at me, doing all she could to remain quiet. All the while she has the face of, great, this is it. This is where it all ends. Out here, where no one's ever going to find us. Me being the brave brother I was, I did all I could to calm her down as we waited for what could have been our final moments. Of course, I still had the axe with me and I could have used it as a last resort. Soon enough, the footsteps got even closer, and we can now see him walk in front of us. Again, he fires into the distance, before eventually continuing down the pathway. We then waited there for another 10 minutes until we could no longer hear any sounds of footsteps crunching in the snow. This was our opportunity. It was either now or never, and we weren't going to stay out here in the cold. My sister and I now start making our way back, following the tracks of prints we had left. Eventually, we can see some familiar signs of where we were earlier, and so we begin to follow it back. Finally, we are able to see our car, and that's when the relief falls over us. With one final bit of adrenaline, we book it to the car and we get inside. I just wish it was over, but it seemed that strange man from the woods had one final message. As I put the car in reverse and start to make my way off onto the main road, I see something in the rearview mirror. From the looks of it, it looks like a figure that's walking out of the woods. Then my sister and I hear another loud pop, and something hit the back of our car. Needless to say, we don't stop until we make it back into town. It's here we file a report with officers and we tell them about everything that happened. They told us they would look into it, and so they ended up talking with the owner. As it turns out, he was nowhere near his property. He was vacationing with his family in Florida. In fact, he even provided proof, and he was eventually cleared. So, who was that man out there in the woods? Well, that remained a mystery, and we never did get an answer. Story number 3. He was hiding out in the woods. I used to live out in the countryside of Scotland, where oftentimes I would spend time out in the woods. Seeing as our town's population was less than 1,500, there wasn't really much to do. Still, this didn't stop my friend and I from coming up with ideas. One evening a couple of years ago, my friend had come to visit me. For the most part, we stayed inside playing video games, but we eventually grew bored of this. Therefore, the next evening, we planned on going out into the woods and spending time there. Seeing as we're teenagers, we sneaked out of the house at around midnight and made our way into the woods. Once we found a good spot, we made a quick campfire. From here, we began to make s'mores and cook some of the hot dogs we had brought with us. We sat there talking, making jokes, and having a good time, and that's when we started to hear something. Soon enough, we are able to make out the silhouette of someone walking up to our campsite. By now, our eyes had adjusted to the dark, so we could see what appeared to be a man in a hoodie. It did surprise us at first, since we thought we were the only ones out here. After all, by now it's like 2 a.m. and we're out in the woods, presumably on our own. As he got closer to us, we can now see better details. This guy had a ski mask on and had a backpack along with him. Great. This would be the time when he took all of her things, if not worse. But here's the weird part. He just stood there staring at us for a few moments before walking off into the woods. Well, that was weird. What do you think that was all about? I don't know, but do you think he had something in that backpack? I mean, why would he be out here wearing a ski mask and hiding who he truly was? This was something we thought about for a bit, as we now started to get a bit scared. Now we started to make our way back home, trying to forget about the strange man we had just seen. However, we would soon stumble upon him minutes later. My friend and I are making our way down the path when our flashlight shines upon something further up ahead. This should have been the moment when we run, but nope, we chose to check it out. As we got closer, we could see what looked like a cell phone light. Sure enough, we can see the same man taking what looked like jewelry and money out from his backpack. On top of this, it looked like he had taken his ski mask off. I shine my flashlight and I reveal the man's true identity. He looked to be in his early 30s, had a scar on his cheek, with short brown hair and a light stubble. Immediately, he stops what he's doing and tells us to come over. Again, we should have taken this moment to run, but we don't.
Hey kids, come over here. I need to talk to you. You two promised me you won't tell anyone you saw me here, right?
Yeah, sure, that's fine, but why the money and the jewelry? Wait, why are you even out here to begin with?
Don't worry about that. Here, let me show you two something.
That's when he gives off one final warning that sends my friend and I packing. He reveals a 9mm, and we're now face to face with the barrel.
See this? If you two say a word, I'm going to come after you. So, I hope we have an understanding.
You can just imagine how my friend and I feel right now. Honestly, we thought he could just change his mind at any moment. He lowers it, and we take off running, heading back home. Safe to say, we called police right after that, and we reported the incident. A couple of days later, a man matching the same description was found and taken in. As an update, we ended up moving a few months after, and we haven't seen or heard from him ever again. Story number 4. That time my sister's dog saved me in the woods. I myself have always loved dogs, and I thank my sister's dog for saving me this evening. Here's how the story goes. It was back in 2014 when I was 19 years old. I'm female, by the way, and I was attending college in Northern California. Also, I lived in the college dorm. Now, for privacy reasons, I won't say the name of the school, but I will say that it's located in a set of woods. I'm sure anyone that lives in Northern California knows what college I'm talking about. Anyways, this evening, my sister had come to visit me with her 2-year-old pet bull, Rocco. Rocco was a sweetheart, but you wouldn't want to go on his bad side. Honestly, he would take a bite out of you if he wanted. Now yeah, normally we don't allow pets in the dorms, but we managed to get away with it this weekend. So it was Sunday evening, and my sister, roommate, and I were watching some movies in the living room. We start getting kind of hungry, and so we figured we could go ahead and order a pizza. Since we didn't want to pay for the delivery, my roommate Jennifer offered to pick it up in town. It was this mom and pop pizza store about 20 minutes from campus. So Jennifer leaves, and my sister and I wait for her. It's now my sister tells me that she's going to take a shower in the meantime. While she's doing that, I offer to take Rocco for a walk in the woods. Really, I just wanted an excuse to listen to the new music I'd put on my phone. Cool. With that, Rocco and I head out into the cool April evening. Of course, since I'm still near campus, I did run into a few college students who were either walking or working out. I even saw a classmate of mine who was just coming back from the trail. She tells me that while she was out there, she had this feeling of being watched. In fact, she saw a man in a hoodie follow her up until a few minutes ago. She honestly seemed pretty concerned about it, but I wrote it off as a college student walking out at night. I mean, come on. The chances of seeing students out at this time was very likely. This seemed to have calmed her down, so I continued on. Eventually, I make it to an area that was a little more isolated and lonesome. I wanted to go here because there was this neat little pond I wanted to stop by at. Eventually, it's 8:30 and Jennifer calls me saying she's almost home. Hey, I'm on the way home. I should be there in about half an hour. Hey, did you want me to bring you something to drink? Sure, Get me a Dr. Pepper and you can get my sister a Sprite. Okay, I'll stop by the grocery store and pick them up. See you in a bit. As soon as I put the phone away, I began to hear footsteps up ahead of me. Sure enough, there is someone in a hoodie walking toward me. I wasn't sure, but by the sounds of it, it sounded like he was mumbling to himself. Little did I know that he had headphones connected to his phone, which was in his pocket. This is important to note, I promise. Well, for some reason, Rocco was acting pretty calm as he hadn't even reacted. This made me think he was just a student walking around, albeit suspiciously. As I try to pass him, we do that awkward dance of trying to get out of each other's way. I decide to stop and wait for him to pass me, but he does the same thing. He finally lifts his head up and he looks up at me. One thing was for sure, he didn't look like a student. He looked to be like in his 40s and was balding. Sorry, sir. You can go ahead. Sorry to bother you. He doesn't say a single word. Instead, he grabs my arm as I hear footsteps approaching me from behind. Sure enough, there is another person in a hoodie making their way towards us. Well, Rocco goes into full protective mode and he jumps onto the guy who was approaching us. I use this as a distraction to get out my pepper spray, and I use it on the first guy, causing him to let go and fall over screaming. Then he gets up and starts stumbling away, but that's not before Rocco jumps up and bites him as well. I manage to get Rocco to stop, and these two take off running into the woods. It's safe to say they might have been looking to rob me, if not worse, so I'm thankful Rocco was there to help me out. When I got back to the dorm, I called campus security and I told them about what happened. Together with officers, they checked out the surrounding woods, but they found no one. Nothing like that has ever happened again, and I'm pretty sure it's Rocco who sent them a valuable message never to return. Story number 5. You never know who you'll find in the Alabama wilderness. Hey there, I'm a long-time listener of yours and enjoy the stories you tell. Here's to hoping I can add my story to your collection of narrated experiences. This took place in 2006, back when I was 14 years old. Alongside my family, we lived out in the woods of Alabama where we owned a small farm and home. The area in which we lived in was nice because there were no people around. Honestly, this was something my dad was happy with since it was his idea to move out here. Of course, being homeschooled at my age meant there wasn't really much for me to do apart from studying. Also, I was an only child, so apart from the occasional family get-togethers, I really didn't talk to anyone else. Luckily for me, I ended up getting a friend. One day while I was studying, my dad had told me he was coming back home with a surprise. That surprise? Well, it turned out to be a golden retriever puppy. With my new friend, we spent many afternoons playing together and heading into the nearby woods. One day, I was with my puppy and we'd been taking our usual route going through the woods. Our plan was to take a gravel-back road that took us to a natural water source in which my dad had built a custom treehouse. Here's where things would get creepy. I had arrived to my little secret spot, and I noticed the place looked different. There was a bunch of trash all over the place, and there even appeared to be empty 12-gauge shells. This alarmed me quite well, but that's when I thought about my dad. Maybe he was out here practicing and he hadn't had the time to clean the place up. So, while my puppy played around, I picked things up and I put them in a neat pile. That way my dad could come back and clean it up. After about 10 minutes of this, I decided to head to the treehouse, but something felt off as I carried my puppy up there. For some reason, I had this absolutely terrible feeling, almost as if something or someone was waiting for me there. Sure enough, as I'm halfway up the ladder, I begin to feel movement. I thought it was just me being shaky carrying my puppy, so I climbed the last remaining steps. In a matter of seconds, I am face to face with a man I was unfamiliar with. He honestly looked like your typical mountain man. Large, dirty overalls with a scruffy long beard. Think of the Wyatt family. In the moments I stared over at him, I saw a mess. There were a bunch of empty bottles, food wrappers, and I was even able to see the source of all the empty shells below. The thing is, he appeared to be asleep, so I guess the movement was just him turning around. I now take the opportunity to make my way down and go back home. Once I reach the bottom, that's when I hear somebody call out to me.
Hey there, girl. What are you doing out here all alone? Hey, wake up there. We got a visitor.
I turned around, and sure enough, there's another one just walking out from behind some trees. This guy seriously looked a lot creepier than the last. Well, you can just imagine my fear as I'm easily left wondering who these people were and why they were out there to begin with. I don't take the chance to talk to them as I'm soon booking it, heading back the way I walked from. All the while, I can hear yelling as they come searching in the woods for me. Luckily, I knew these woods like the back of my hand, so I was able to hide underneath some large rocks. As I waited there for what seemed like an eternity, my puppy stared up at me with a look of confusion. She's still so little that she doesn't really make any noises, so I think that in itself saved me. Had she been full size, she might have jumped out and given my position away. Wouldn't you know it, that when I am about to run the final stretch, I can hear them approaching. Quickly, I dive underneath the rocks again, and I watch from below as they walk near me. They stumble around calling out to me, saying that when they found me, I was going to be all theirs. Seriously, it doesn't take a genius to realize that they weren't joking about this. But something to add was they didn't sound like they were all there. My best guess was they might have had a little too much to drink. Guess that explained all the empty bottles. Anyways, at one point I seriously thought they were going to find me, since one of them dropped a bottle on the ground, causing it to fall next to me.
Are you kidding me? You would drop it on the ground, wouldn't you? Hey, at least I didn't break it.
Now, I'm not sure if it was because it was practically night at this point, or because this guy wasn't all there, but he bends down and reaches for the bottle. At that moment, I'm face to face with the first guy yet again, and I just stopped thinking, great, he found me. Instead, he picks the bottle up and both of them walk away laughing like madmen. After waiting there another 15 minutes, I crawl out and I'm not able to see anyone. I now sprint the rest of the way home while at the same time thinking that one of them will jump out at any moment. They never do, and as soon as I'm home, I tell my mom and dad about it, who are just getting home from the store. Immediately, we call police and they do an entire investigation. Unfortunately, they came up empty-handed and they weren't able to find the two. We never did see them again as we moved out a couple of months afterwards. Story number 6, Lunatic Out in the Alaskan Woods. Back in 2009, I was attending university in Anchorage as part of earning my business degree. I lived on campus and spent most of my time studying and attending school. I'm female and I was 20 years old. During one of my many semesters there, I met a friend of mine who I still talk to even till this day. We will call him Kyle. Kyle was an avid outdoorsman and would often spend time camping out in the wilderness. One day, he invited me, wanting to know if I wanted to join him on one of his camping trips. There was this awesome wooded area up in the mountains that he often frequented with his uncle. See, his uncle had built a cabin out in those woods, and they would use it to be out there days at a time. I myself have never been out camping or in the wilderness before, so I figured this would be a great introductory. One afternoon, after both of our classes had ended, we met up at the cafeteria for lunch. Thereafter, we made the hour drive heading past Alyeska, Alaska. Now, instead of taking the road that took us to the resort there, we ended up taking a different route. This route took us further into the wilderness before eventually we reached a dirt road. There was a fencing here in which we moved in order to pass, and once we passed it, we entered a set of woods that took us higher into the mountainside. Eventually, after a total of almost an hour and a half of driving, we reached a clearing that had a nice little cabin right alongside a frozen lake. It still being February, there was still snow everywhere. This made for the perfect getaway. Once we arrived, we settled in and we started to warm up the cabin with some firewood at the fireplace. Soon after, I sat on the couch in the living room, organizing my things. Meanwhile, Kyle was getting some firewood from the back of his pickup. When he comes back inside, he mentioned something that he thought was pretty odd. Hey Kyle, what's up? Did you see something out there? It's not that I saw someone, but I did notice something at the back of the cabin. Here, I'll show you through the window. We now head over to the back room, which had a perfect view of this side of the cabin. See there? Don't those look like boot prints? Yeah, you're right. Well, that's strange. Do you think your uncle was out here? Sure enough, Kyle calls his uncle, trying to see if he was the one who had caused those footprints. Hey, Uncle Bruce, were you out here at the cabin the other day or something? No, not me. I was going to have somebody go out there and fix the heating system, but they told me they wouldn't be there until tomorrow. No one should be out there. This remained a mystery to us, and it would lead to a strange series of events over the next couple of days. Fast forward to later that evening. By now, we sat by the fireplace eating some food and watching some TV. As we sat there enjoying the night, I needed to get up to use the restroom. I make my way over and do my business and get up to wash my hands. That's when I noticed it. See, the mirror next to the sink reflects the window right behind me. Therefore, if something was standing at that window, I would be able to see it in the reflection. See where this is going? Anywho, as I look out the reflection, I could see what looked like a shadow figure looking right at me. This surprised me, so quickly I turn around only to see whoever it was run off into the night. Naturally, I was confused since I thought perhaps Kyle had gone outside to do something. Hey, Kyle, were you just outside a minute ago? What were you doing out in the cold? What are you talking about, dude? It's like 10 degrees outside. No way I'm gonna be out there. Okay, because no lie, I saw something in the reflection of the mirror staring at me from the window. Wait, what? No, that's impossible. I guess there was a possibility, but here's some things to remember. It's the middle of the night out in the Alaskan wilderness. On top of that, we are pretty much in the middle of nowhere, miles away from any towns or signs of people. Who would possibly be out here stalking the cabin? Well, that night, I had trouble sleeping because I kept hearing the sound of snow crunching outside the window. I'll admit, I was scared to look out the window, as I was expecting somebody with a weapon to be staring back at me. I mean, Kyle was armed and he was training to be a park ranger, but we weren't sure if there was more than one person outside. No way we would stand a chance against multiple people. Anyways, the noises eventually went away, and all fell silent yet again. The next morning, we ended up getting a call from the heating company, and they told us they would be coming to work on the furnace later in the afternoon. This is important, I promise. Well, considering we couldn't come up with any explanations for the noises outside, we put it down to an animal or something. Also, it had snowed last night, so any tracks that were left behind had been covered with a fresh batch of snow. So, Kyle and I spent the day out in the wilderness exploring and taking in the sights. Kyle showed me how to make my own campfire and even showed me the different methods on how to do it. We had been out there for what seemed like hours, and finally at around 5 p.m. it was starting to get dark. Here's where things get interesting. Kyle and I both start to hear what sounds like someone moaning. It was weird. It's almost as if the person was crying, but at the same time laughing, if that makes any sense. Soon enough, we could hear the rustling of branches and trees, and that's when he steps out. A man wearing all dark clothing with a large backpack steps out from behind the shrubbery. And let me tell you, this guy was tall. He easily towered over Kyle and I. He was easily 6'7" and probably weighed upwards of 270 pounds. But that wasn't what was scary. See, along with his creepy smile, he also had a pretty powerful Remington with him. My friend and I nervously say hello as he pretty much just stares at us. Finally, he speaks up and says,
Hey there, kids. Don't mind me. I'm just out here doing some work. No need to worry.
Something didn't seem genuine, as he sounded like he wasn't all there. He then walks off into the woods, but that's not before leaving us with one final message.
You know, the two of you looked really nice in that cabin of yours. Maybe you can invite me next time and we can have some fun together.
That in itself was creepy, but we ignored him and went back to the cabin. When we got back, we found the place a complete mess. The windows were smashed, and there was a bunch of empty shells everywhere. From the looks of it, it appeared this guy had completely destroyed everything inside my friend's uncle's cabin. Needless to say, we quickly grab our things and head over to the car. Of course, there was only one problem with that. The wheels were completely torn apart. Now there was no way of leaving. Safe to say, he was the one responsible. Seriously, in that moment it felt like a cheesy plot of a scary movie, but now we were living it. That's when we remembered the people who were coming to work on the heating. They were supposed to come later today to work on it. If we can somehow fend off this weird guy until they arrive, then we will be safe. Speaking of playing it safe, we call officers and we tell them about where we were. They told us it would take about an hour to get there due to the heavy snowfall further down the mountain from us. Well, wouldn't you know it, the heating company was already on the way and they arrived about 20 minutes later. You can imagine their surprise as we explained everything to them. In summary, we all drive down the mountain into town where we met up with officers. After explaining where we had last seen him, they go and search the area. Yeah, they do end up finding him, and as it turned out, they had been looking for this guy for quite some time, as he had quite a history to him. So yeah, those footprints in the snow didn't belong to the heating company. Also, he had been stalking our cabin for quite some time, but he must have hesitated when we arrived. I'm just glad he didn't choose to act when we were there. I guess that's one plus side to the story. Regardless, that was my scary experience out in the woods. Story number 7. Unexplained chanting in the woods. I'll go ahead and begin this tale with some visual descriptions. I live in a small suburb in the Pacific Northwest that is next to a state park. It's here myself and my friends often spend time running and working out. See, I am part of the track and field club at my high school, and this was usually the place where we would meet up. Normally, our schedule would be to run Monday to Friday after school from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. This meant that the weekends were left up to us. We could choose to run on our own, or we could choose the time to take a break. Seeing as I'm an overachiever, I myself would oftentimes go running into the park. One early morning in particular, I was feeling especially adventurous. The time had just changed the day before, and I was able to get an extra hour of sleep. Because of this, I wanted to catch the early morning sunrise on top of a large field. Normally, I could have taken the path we took, but there was a shortcut through a set of woods. Now, I myself have never been through those woods, but my friends have told me there are various signs that point you in the direction to go. On top of this, the trail is supposed to be straightforward with no way of getting lost. Cool. So I begin my run heading toward the crossroads a mile in. Sure enough, I reach the point in which I could take either the normal path or the path through the woods. I actually almost thought about going my usual route, but I decided I would still take the new one. The once clear and open fields of that park started to turn into darkness as I was soon being surrounded by trees. Since it was still early in the morning, it was pretty dark out at this time, but I wasn't really too concerned about it. After about 10 minutes of running, I can see a sign up ahead of me. I take a brief moment to catch my breath and read what it says. It says, Sycamore Hill, half a mile away. Sweet, my friends were right. This was a faster route. However, that wasn't the only sign there. Right below it, there appeared to be a note attached. I looked down, and it's a piece of paper marked with a bunch of strange symbols. There was also this writing that I myself couldn't understand. My best guess was that it was in a language I didn't know. I found this odd, but carried on regardless. About a minute later, I stopped again to tie my shoelace. As I'm doing so, I then began to hear what sounded like crying. Well, not crying per se, but almost as if somebody needed help. I found this odd because I thought I was the only one out here. But who knows? Maybe it was possible that someone else had come out here to get an early start on their run. I start to back up again, but that's when I clearly hear what sounds like chanting, almost as if a group of people were singing in a pattern. Honestly, it was really creepy, but at the same time, I was intrigued by the noise. Yeah, I know I should have just left it alone, but I followed the noise heading off the trail and going into the woods. As I slowly crept through the wilderness, the sounds started to get closer and closer. I still couldn't see much since my phone's light didn't illuminate at a far distance. However, I wouldn't really need the light from my phone because I myself was able to see what looked like a small fire up ahead of me. The chanting grew louder and louder, and soon I realized what was going on. I could see a group of hooded figures standing in a circle, chanting and throwing various dolls and other things into a fire. Each of them also appeared to have different symbols on their clothing. Honestly, the best way for me to describe it is like stumbling upon some strange, lost, weird society in the middle of nowhere. Let's just say I don't bother to stick around and find out who these people were. After all, I'm pretty sure they were up to no good. I now start to back up, but clumsy me ends up breaking a couple of branches. This causes the group to go immediately silent as I now book it. While running, I can hear footsteps echoing behind me, but thanks to my running experience, I am able to get away from them with just a few scratches. I am able to find the way towards Sycamore Hill, and by this point, the sun had already risen. Unfortunately, it starts to rain after 15 minutes, which meant no one was going to be out here for me to tell them. Well, once I reach the end of the trail, I finally have cell phone reception. This is the point in which I called park rangers and I tell them about the people I had seen. After all, I knew fairly well you couldn't have campfires out here. Needless to say, they scanned the area hours later, but all they found were what was left over of the group. Food wrappers, creepy strange symbols written on the trees and rocks, and a bunch of burned dolls. The group remained unexplained, and park rangers and officers are still trying to figure out who the group of people were. Story number 8, A Not-So-Abandoned Shed. It was around 2004, and I was in middle school when this took place. At that time, I used to live in a pretty safe neighborhood in northern Michigan. Oftentimes, my friends and I would go out and play in the nearby set of woods. This is a tradition I keep now, but that's not without my trusty 45 by my side. Anywho, I'll take you back to the summer of that year. Our school had a summer camp that year, and all of my friends would be going. Since this would be an awesome opportunity to spend time with friends, I immediately signed up, and we were soon out in the wilderness. It was a total of about 70 students and 10 different teachers and counselors. They divided us into teams, and we each stayed in our own cabins. Now, while this was the first time some of the students had been out in the woods, my friends and I already had experience. That's why I feel this plays an important role. Anyways, let me take you to one evening in particular. It was around 11 p.m., and by now, it was lights out. All students were to stay inside their cabins and sleep until the next morning. Getting out wasn't something the teachers wanted us doing. Of course, that didn't stop my friend Skylar and I from getting out and exploring. See, our plan was to get out and explore on our own since we were told not to go off the normal paths. At around midnight, Skylar and I carefully made our way out of the cabin by opening one of the windows. In case you're wondering, the doors were pretty old and made a lot of noise when opened. That's why we used the window in the restroom to get out. Sweet. Let the adventure begin. Skylar and I make our way into the nearby set of woods, and we're on a quest to go to this old abandoned cabin we had seen earlier. After about 15 minutes of walking in the dark with flashlights, we stumble upon what remained of this cabin, if you really wanted to call it that. It was more like a large shed with a couple of windows on the side. Skylar and myself started to make our way over, and that's when we heard what sounded like coughing. We both froze as we looked around, and we were trying to find the source. Nothing. Well, that was weird. Was that you just coughed now? I'm right next to you. Do you honestly think that was me? Okay, I get it. But then, who was that? Maybe it was just the wind. Let's just forget about it. We step inside, and there appears to be a bed with a portable coffee maker, and there's even some food left on a small box. It was weird. It almost looked as if somebody was living here. The thing is, nobody was inside. We now make our way outside, and that's when we see him. Waiting outside was a tall man with long dark hair and a beard.
Hey, what are you two kids doing in my house? You see this axe I have in my hands? It's going to be you two next I use it on.
We start to run, but he gives chase. He gives up after a minute or so, and my friend and I eventually make it back to the camp. It's here we tell the teachers about what we experienced. Needless to say, we go on lockdown and park rangers and officers are called. An hour or so later, they find the man that we had encountered. Turns out that guy had a little too much in him after discovering a bunch of empty bottles in the shed. In the end, he was taken in for questioning and we never did see him again after. So, yeah, don't go into the woods at night and don't go into abandoned looking sheds. You just never know if someone might be watching and waiting for you. Before we get to the last story, I just want to say thank you once again for making it this far in the video. Remember, if you'd like to see more including previews and exclusive content, then make sure to be following me over on my Instagram @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Thanks. On to the last story. Story number 10. Someone kept visiting my home in the woods. At last, we reach the final entry to today's episode of Storytime. It's a short one, but it's still creepy nonetheless. Here it is. Anyone out there live in the middle of nowhere? No, I'm not talking about living like 5 or 10 miles from the nearest city. I mean, literally at least 50 miles from anyone. Yup, that describes myself perfectly. See, I'm a retired park ranger, and after retiring, I moved out into a small cabin I built in the Alaskan wilderness. Now, even though I own my small home in the woods, I've been dealing with some really strange and unexplained happenings. For starters, I would notice tracks in the snow near my house. Of course, I do see the occasional moose or bear, but these tracks would be from a person. I knew one thing, they weren't mine. Also, it's important to mention I do have a Siberian Husky, but they didn't match his prints either. Something else to note was there would be times I would arrive home to find trash completely all over the lawn. See, every week I drive an hour into the nearest town to throw it out. It's here I would also do grocery shopping for the month. Anywho, a lot of this activity remained a mystery for many months. That's until one day I decided to set up some CCTV cameras. Maybe finally I would be able to catch what in the world was happening here. Of course, it seemed that as soon as I installed them, the activity had stopped, because no more strange occurrences took place. However, one day I was lucky to catch someone on camera. One day my dog and I were returning from our usual trip when we happened to notice the front door was wide open and it was completely damaged. This was alarming, as I knew I had closed it before I left. Slowly, I started to make my way around the property, seeing if I could find anyone or anything that was responsible. What I find inside the house was probably one of the most bizarre things I'd ever seen. Written on the walls were a bunch of weird messages, along with some strange symbols I'd never seen before. Messages like, "I'm watching you," and "He's waiting to come and get you" were written everywhere. Oh, and did I forget to mention that whoever was in here wrote it in red paint? Ugh. Well, once I checked the entire house, I went over to the computer to check out the CCTV cameras. Sure enough, I catch a man in a hoodie driving up to my home, then proceeding to walk out with a metal baseball bat. From there, he manages to kick the door down and make his way inside. Now, since I don't have cameras inside the house, I didn't get to see what he actually did inside of here. However, he did end up taking my safe I had in my room, which was where I kept my money and other valuables. Of course, calling officers into the woods like this in the middle of nowhere was pretty much useless since they are so far away. This meant I had to deal with this on my own. Fast forward almost a year later, and by now, all the strange activity had stopped. I'd built a fence around my property, and I installed a bunch of alarms and put up warning signs. Well, I was bored one night, and I was listening to some music and watching the camera monitors. Sure enough, the alarm sets off, and I managed to see a car approaching my property. This time, I made sure to give him a warning of a lifetime he would never forget. I fire away outside as the sound of the metal hits their car, and whoever was driving drove off to never return. Honestly, I'm not sure who that person was or persons, but I never saw them again after that. Don't get me wrong, I like visitors. I have family and friends who come to see me, but when you try to do something like that, you're just wanting trouble.